Welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. I'm David Peacock.
Stop owning your own content.
Young leaders are stepping up.
Bring everyone to the table
and imagine their world anew.
Tourism done well is the authentic sharing of people, places, and culture in a sustainable and regenerative framework. It creates deep connections between people and elevates our common connections as human beings and ennobles our differences. And frankly, it's the opposite of war. Simply put, the world needs more tourism done well. In this industry, we use the term experiential tourism development to describe the process that focuses on enabling people to experience a country, city, or particular place by actively and meaningfully engaging with its history, people, culture, food, environment, etc. Today, in a digitally disrupted world, experiential development takes place on a continuum from the in-place or in-situ work done on the ground in a destination by organizations like Tourism Cafe from Canada, the Veneto Experience Lab in the US, to the immersive virtual experience development platforms like Fortnite and the impending Metaverse. In between, linking the two, is the augmented reality work of companies like EXAR Studios. Joe Veneto is the Chief Experience Officer at Veneto Collaboratory for 26 years now. Ben Switzer is the Chief Growth Officer at EXAR Studios in London, Canada. And Andreas Weissenborn is the VP of Research and Advocacy at Destinations International. Joe, first up, question to you. In short, what is the Veneto experience formula process, and can you give us an example?
Thanks, David. Great to be with you. Let me step back from your question on the experience formula and say this whole concept of experiential tourism is really being driven by consumers or travelers. And I like to say that experiences are the currency of 21st century travelers. They are the motivation, taking them to destinations around the world. And what we do is we use the experience formula process. It's a process that we've designed to help destinations, attractions, and businesses create what I like to call engaging and immersive experiences. And these are experiences that are unique, behind the scenes, that really immerse people in an experience, in the stories, in an event. It's all about connection. And one of the things we've learned over the past 2 years is that as human beings, we crave connection. So our experience formula process is all about connection, stories, and emotion.
Do you want to expand on that and just give us an example of a piece of work so we can wrap our heads around it?
Sure. So when we take a look at a destination, one of the things that we'll do is we look at destination essence, or some people like to say the DNA of a destination. We've worked in a couple of recent projects. One of them was in Scottsdale, Arizona. The other one was in Richmond, British Columbia. And when we look at Scottsdale, for instance, and the essence of that destination, it's called the West's most western town. And so when we looked at the West's most western town, one of the things that I looked at is how could I experience that? And there were sort of these little pockets and attractions, etc. But there was a gap. And if I, as a traveler, want the essence of the West, how do I put that together? And so with the city of Scottsdale, we worked on a project, and one of the experiences is called the Best of the West. And it is an experience that runs about 2.5 hours, connecting all of these different sites, attractions, and stories as part of the essence of this Western heritage and frontier of the city that didn't exist before.
Joe, thanks for that. I'm going to move on to you, Ben. Just as a bit of an intro, Ben Switzer and I have been working on a couple collaborations in Canada. EXAR Studios came into my consciousness, I'm guessing about 6 months ago, with some fantastic work that I personally see as sort of the midpoint on this continuum from in situ to totally virtual events. an incredibly bright and an incredibly engaging young man who's doing some great work. So Ben, I'm going to throw it to you. What's EXAR's approach, and can you give us an example of that too, please?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I think I want to riff a little bit off of what Joe was saying, because people are seeking curated experiences. They want to have deeper connection to a place that has all of these different facets. And they're finding it harder and harder to discover those experiences in an authentic way. And when we look at our technology in particular, which focuses on augmented reality, but also extended reality of building things and having those things connect, or looking at an architectural feature and asking, what's the information that we can place on this that's going to enhance their experience of that place? And there's a lot of talk around Metaverse as being somewhere else. And we don't think of it as somewhere else. It's actually right here, but it's a bridge to connect us more deeply to that sense of place. So in terms of process, when we look at a destination, we kind of ask the question, what are the strategic goals of the destination? And that comes from an economic development perspective. And it could also come from, the strategic plan of the tourism organization that we're working with, of the city. And then we're trying to align those metrics of success with other things like, who are the community organizations here? What are the cultural stories? What are the dining experiences? And kind of finding in the middle of that Venn diagram, what's the experience that connects them together, that's going to feel authentic, but also importantly, shareable. Because we're also seeing that this is super important, that people, as part of their travel experience, they want to share that experience. They want to have a social connection. They want to have a deeper spiritual connection. And I think and I can say, because I'm actually sitting in currently in the library of the Guelph Black Heritage Society. I was just playing on this old pipe organ that was donated just before. So I'm super inspired and thinking about, how do we connect this heritage site as part of Guelph's tourism strategy? And you have to kind of look at the landscape and ask, how do we animate these assets in an authentic way that elevates the entire strategy of the region? And we look at those as our design parameters, like budget, timeline, strategy, and cultural context, I guess you could say. And then we do a design from that point.
So Ben, give us a real in situ example of that, where you've done some work, because I hear you. I mean, there's a continuum. You're rooted in the physical and the real, but you're playing in the metaverse, but you're talking about something in between, aren't you? You're talking about literally the difference between AR and VR. Maybe we should make that distinction clear, but an example would help.
Sure. So one example I can give, this was a project we did with Digital Main Street here in Canada. We are trying to provide relief essentially to Main Street businesses. So we had some funding through DMS Labs, and we approached a national historic site called Banting House. Banting House is in London, Ontario. It's the birthplace of insulin, this amazing medical discovery. And this is a place that ordinarily attracts a huge number of people, almost like pilgrimages that people make from over 100 countries. And of course, with COVID, that was all just shut down. And they were struggling because their exhibits were not accessible during that period either. So their revenues were declining, and we have all these challenges that had come up for the attraction itself. And so we actually approached the historic site, which was in a business district as well. And we created an immersive exhibit, taking the inside of that house, fully reproducing it, placing it outside, allowing you with your phone to actually navigate through it. And as you move through this portal into the exhibit, the narrative experience begins unfolding around you like a short film. And you're sort of engaging with this historical context, and it's very immersive. Like, you can zoom in super, super close on details. It's life-sized scale. So as you're walking around inside of it, it feels real. It has this very deep immersive quality. But then we also combine that with like an audio tour of the business area around. So there's like breweries and art galleries and other experiences nearby. And this is the cornucopia. This is the exhibit. And then we build a whole tour around that exhibit. So it becomes a complete tourist experience for the visitor. And then the business improvement area is happy because we're contributing revenue towards local business. The National Historic Site is more resilient, and they're able to operate and generate revenues. You could even donate from inside the experience, the way we built it. And tourism's happy because we just built a permanent legacy exhibit that's going to be there and stand the test of time. And, there's like school trips full of kids coming to see this because it's way more fun to experience history in a simulation than from a textbook and abstractions in your imagination.
That's a great example. And so standing outside Bethune House, I could hold my phone up and see a skeletal representation of what was inside.
Exactly. We had 3 or 4 layers to it. The first one is the discovery, the moment of discovery, eureka, 3 a.m. Dr. Banding shoots out of bed and says, "I've got it. This is the formula for insulin." And you see that recreation. And then the simulation sort of like disappears once you finish interacting with it. And then there's an art gallery of paintings that we've sort of hung in the air. And then as you approach them, the painting kind of speaks to you about what its contents are, what the inspiration was, what was the artistic context, the historical context. And then that experience shifts away and it goes into like a memorial of service of his life. And it's like pictures of the Queen and all this like other stuff he did, like interesting things like he invented the decompression chamber for divers and a flight suit for jet pilots. So other cool facts about his life that we presented in stages of the experience. And the experience ends with a call to action, as all good experiences should, which is donate and support the heritage site. But also, hey, did you know that there's a great like craft brewery nearby that you can go and check out as well?
So hang on, the Bethune House's hours are probably kind of 9 to 5 most weekdays, longer on the weekends. You're talking about a 24/7 Bethune House that I can get to on my phone when I'm standing there.
Pretty much. I mean, it works best during the day, but it can be experienced at night. I don't always recommend it at night because you can't always see where you're walking around. And when it's very immersive, yeah. You can kind of forget where you're standing. But in effect, yes.
That's very cool. Very cool. Next up, Andreas Weissenborn, one of my favorite thinking partners. We sit down and pull things apart a lot together. Andreas is the one who really sort of first turned me on to the idea of the metaverse and tourism, and has some great examples. We've sat on a number of panels together. We sat with our friends from Sub Nation talking about immersive reality on the ECM panel last year. Andreas, this isn't your main thing. You are the advocacy VP. But you really think a lot about this. Talk to us about the completely immersive VR side of tourism and what you're seeing, please.
Yeah, and thank you, David. Also, glad to be on with Ben and Joe as well. I just want to put on record, this is the 3rd time I've been on to talk metaverse and whatnot. I just want to let people know, like, I do like my life in IRL. I'm not trying to be Jack in the Matrix or whatnot or become Johnny Mnemonic. So I just got to put that out there.
Well, hey, I'm gonna challenge you on that one because you told me about a meeting I think it was last year or the year, just a year before that, when you kept using the words IRL, and finally you had to recognize that all of the people in the meeting with you who are younger than you didn't make the same distinction.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good starting point. I mean, our lens and my lens and why I'm so interested in this is because one of your guests you've had before, Mara Gast, always has this famous quote. She always says it starts with a visit. Now, I'm not going to correct Mara, but I'm going to turn it a little bit. I'm actually going to say it all begins with a brand, right? And one of the unique things about brand is that it transcends both physical and virtual realms. And we had already kind of been seeing this compression happen before the pandemic. And obviously the pandemic rapidly accelerated societal shifts that we've never seen before. That in particular is obviously where we spend our time, and particularly where we spend our attention, right? Like, our attention now pivoted to the question I asked at first was like, what actually is the destination? It's no longer a physical realm. It's actually a physical and virtual realm. And if that's true, then that means you need to have your assets and brand and marketing in place in both. And so I really took a notice to that and started to realize there's a role here for destination organizations. One, because back to the brand comment, we are the main stewards of our brand, right? That is what we do and what we do well. And second was the opportunity of this was that it also presents a possible vacuum. And if we don't fill it, someone else will. And so really what I've seen since I put out the initial article about like, what is a destination per se? And obviously, Facebook changed their name to Meta, and subsequently you've seen all these players now jump in to this space. On the destination organization side, one of these unique ones I just saw actually within the last month was what Visit Cape Town just announced. They actually put forward their own augmented reality Cape Town metaverse experience where you actually go and look at explore foods, experiences, all that kind of stuff that is in the Cape Town brand, but it's still a unique experience. One of the, I think, stories I left out of my original article was I did a little bit of history about obviously the competition for brand, because that's important too. Every destination is competing at the world stage. It's really for the world stage of attention. I actually went back to 2007. I remember this story where it was the video game. I wish Ed was on to talk video games about this, but it was the video game Halo 3 came out on a Tuesday, and so many people bought it and paid attention to it that it actually skewed the box office of that week of actual movies. There's a Ben Stiller movie called like The Comeback Kid, and they blamed Halo 3 on those bad performances. And I just thought that's a unique example, again, of competing with attention. As destinalizations, we're a lot of times we're like looking at business events, right? We're looking like, okay, what else is in the convention center or the conference center at the same time? Instead of actually looking at your attention and what you're competing with this way, we're now looking this way too. Saying, oh, what's actually happening potentially in the metaverse? If a concert happens in the metaverse, that could attract 12 to 100 million people. Do we actually maybe want to put on a real life event in it? And I think you're finally starting to see destinalizations kind of get into that fray, which I'm excited about, because again, we are so uniquely qualified for this. Like, we are one of the most uniquely qualified entities to represent our communities in kind of this new next normal in the virtual space.
And it is happening way faster than we think. We were literally in that presentation at ECM last summer, and it was while we were in the presentation that the announcement came out that Mark had changed the name to the Metaverse to Meta. It was literally during that presentation, which is kind of strange and funny at the same time. All right, convergence is happening. Joe's work on the ground is being incorporated into virtual work in the Metaverse. And in between, there's this bridge, which is AR. And I think it is that way. But I'm going to throw the question to you next, Ben. What happens next? What happens next here in the world of tourism on that continuum from in-place experiences all the way to the Metaverse?
Well, I think that continuum is the right word. And I think that what we're going to see is less friction. So, there's a lot of silos in these different ways of experiencing the brand. I thought Andreas spoke very eloquently about that. The brand transcends the media in which it's experienced because it happens in the mind. It's an emotional connection, all these things. But right now, we're seeing basically points of friction. So the user may not be aware necessarily that there's even a metaverse around them. Well, how do we make them aware? Well, we've got to market it. So now you've created sort of a meta layer of marketing, and that'll be true for virtual reality. It's true for augmented reality. It's true for the destination, generally speaking. I think what we're going to see is a greater synergy of all of those experiences to be frictionless for the user. You're going to see like AR glasses and things like that are starting to come out. And I think there's a hardware component of that. But I think the market and the consumer are going to drive basically better partnerships, I think, between different companies that are utilizing these technologies and destinations, so that there's cohesion across the different media. And I think it's going to be like, for example, in my mind, as I was listening to Andreas, I'm, in the Sydney Opera House in virtual reality, and I'm seeing a symphony orchestra perform. And I can actually book my flight with a couple button clicks from inside that experience. And then when I get there, there's a companion application, let's say, which can bring me around that area and see, and that thing that inspired me to travel, I can actually go there and have a cool experience that's distinctive, it's exclusive, it's on location, and everything is branded smoothly across. And I think we're going to see, like, and this is a great example too, like South Korea is building, I think, like $300 million metaverse project. Governments are now investing in this, seeing it as infrastructure. And they should be seeing it as infrastructure to scale it up, because you're right, we are competing on the world stage. And those who don't adopt are going to fall behind. So those a few examples of of where I think it could go.
I really love that example. I think the word that you use that I really want to underline there is seamless. Jeff Katz, who a bunch of you know, he was one of the he was one of the Harvard graduates around the time of Idea Lab. He did a show a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about data being, essentially the core asset in seamless transition. He talked about a thing where you can jump on a bus now and tell your ride and drive right through the gates at Denver Airport and actually get on your plane. You've cleared customs, but the idea that gets embedded into an experience, we hadn't talked about that. That's a really interesting piece, and data has a huge role to play in that. So that's fascinating. Joe, I'm going to go to you on this one. What happens next? You've been developing immersive, authentic, and really internationally recognized experiences for well more than 20 years. What happens next?
Well, I think what happens next is I think that destinations really need to understand that they are community catalysts, and that what they need to do to stay, what they need to do to really stay, top of mind is this constant innovation. Because these amazing elements that Ben and Andreas are talking about, those elements can enhance the experience, but the essence of what we're looking at is what is in that destination. And so what we've seen destination marketing organizations or management organizations start to have people in destination development roles or destination experience roles. They're putting more importance, if you will, on this whole concept of destination development. And it's sort of this cross between sort of placemaking and experiential. And the essence of those two things coming together really will drive the destination development forward and these experiences. I mean, again, when consumers are looking to travel, they're looking, I like to say, they're looking for local, authentic, and unique experiences that are connected to the heart, the soul, and the people. So where do you find those? They're in the stories, they're in the history, and there are many destinations that are sitting on amazing experiences that have yet to be developed. And in some cases, you have experience gaps where these experiences are just waiting to be developed. And so the destinations really need to take the initiative and facilitate that whole process.
Well, and that's a great point. The facilitation role of the destination has many, many benefits to it, and not the least of which is the creation of these experiences. But it ends up not being about the DMO or the destination, but it ends up being about the stakeholders taking a role in those experiences. There is no experience in Louisville unless the suppliers, the purveyors, the people who make up the experience are part of it. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, and your example about Louisville, for instance, right? So Louisville Tourism took a look at the African American community, and they looked at the contributions of that community as it related to its brand pillars of bourbon, history, and horse racing. And there were all these amazing stories. And so in 2020 and 2021, we created 6 new experiences with destination attractions highlighting these experiences. It's called the Unfiltered Truth Collection. And it's this amazing immersive experience through the African American community and their contribution. And if you look at it, what we did in Louisville was we created this additional layer to give people a deeper, richer experience, and one that either they haven't had or maybe haven't considered before.
That's fantastic. Andreas, your key lane, the thing you've really championed over the last 4 years, is this idea of engaged communities, of relevance, of what's the term that you and Jack coined?
Community shared value.
Community shared value. Isn't that just the best example of community shared value when you bring a bunch of stakeholders? A Joe Veneto experience has a couple dozen stakeholders who are working on an experience. Talk about demonstrating the relevance of the destination organization back to the community by amplifying their stories. That matters, doesn't it, Andreas?
Yeah, and there's a big point here to be made is that the greatest currency in the world right now, it is not gold, it is not oil, it is not cash, although I will take all three if any of you got any. It's actually talent, and particularly talent acquisition. We are firmly in what I'm calling the talent wars. If you can live wherever you want, that means you can work wherever you want. So the traditional trope of working where you live is gone and severed. We need to be mindful of that. Anything that accelerates or expands our brands, our experience, our lures towards talent acquisition. And so being aligned with everything that Ben and Joe mentioned is that most important, because that's what we're competing for right now, is how do we get new minds, new families into our communities to live and experience there. And you're going to see all these different elements start to take shape, and looking at that in terms of the acquisition of how do we bring new people to our destinations.
So I want to take it back to a metaverse question, though. To me, some sense, the metaverse is still ethereal. I don't know my VR goggles yet. Quick question: will I soon?
All right, so let's do a little backtrack on the term itself, not baby without the bathwater. We have to remember the term metaverse itself came out from an early 90s Neil Stephenson novel about a dystopian future. And I think one of the things we have to be conscious of is again, I'm going to go back to brand. Metaverse is still owned by Facebook, and they have not had the most positive brand in the past 5 years. And you're seeing not just Metaverse, but I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of other terms here, NFTs, Web 3.0, not have the highest relevancy as it should because of the brand of the companies that own it. However, I still feel that attention at a virtual realm is important. So maybe it's not necessarily a Facebook metaverse per se, but it doesn't mean it couldn't be an owned augmented reality experience, something else. I do think, I want to agree with Ben. I think a huge thing is always going to be in the consumer side. Consumer tech really inspires everything. I am expecting when you see companies like Google or Apple, long expected to put their own iteration of that, I start to think you'll see that part of it. But we should remind ourselves too, we are not in person right now, and we're all working, right? And this is lucky about it. And I would consider this an iteration of the metaverse. So I would make some argument. We were already here. I am doing my job in my basement. I don't know where you guys all are. So we're already here in some aspects of it. I think it's more the other sort of social barriers that will be broken down, like, other key things we do as humans, right? Dating and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of sort of where you see the barriers break down, that I think people consider, oh, we're actually in more of the metaverse, but I'm arguing we're actually here now. So.
Wow, that's cool. I got to tell you, Andreas, I have been on more than a few dozen calls with you, and I've always pictured your office on the third floor of a brownstone walk up in DC. I'm shocked to learn it's your basement.
Yeah, this is DIHQ in my basement here.
Well, I just, with all the guitars on the wall and stuff, I thought it's got to be the third floor, man. Anyway, all right, so we're getting a little tight on time here, but I want to throw it to you first, Joe. What's the call to action? Not just call to action on this continuum from in situ to the metaverse and AR in between. What's the call to action to all of us? We're destination leaders, we're destination organizations. We are working hard on our relevance. We're also working hard to make tourism all that it can be, which I think is a force for good in this world. So over to you for final thoughts. What's the call to action?
So the call to action, I think, is that destinations need to really look at their importance as this community catalyst. And, the pandemic really showcased this, right? When you looked at the fact that some destinations were starting to promote restaurants, and they were starting to promote artists and things like that. And those are partners that typically aren't they're part of a community. And now all of a sudden the destination saw that their destination included so many more components. So look at, how do you take all the elements of your community and how do you develop those experiences on an ongoing basis? Again, facilitating that process so that you can create this really amazing experience. And as Ben and also Andreas were talking, not just on site, but virtually as well, because people are going to want that experience before they come. They're going to want it while they're there. And then they're going to want to relive it when they're back home or when they're with their friends.
Just one follow-up question to that. Are you seeing a higher demand for the kind of work you've been doing over the last 20 odd years, a higher acceptance at the DMO level?
So it's continuing to grow. And one of the reasons that we do our experience lab every year is to bring destination marketing execs and their partners into a site where we've done this work, where they can come in, be immersed in a destination and see it through the eyes of a consumer and realize how important this is, taking away those key aspects that they can translate to their destination.
Thanks for that. I'm going to throw it to you, Andreas. Call to action. You wear so many hats in this industry. What do we do next?
I'll always leave it on a positive. It's been the same answer every time we've talked about this, is to understand that even though I think you hear terms like this and talk about this stuff, and destinations have already had it tough, and the pandemic's only made it tougher. But I always have to reiterate, we are uniquely qualified for this. There's no other entity that can sit across the table across civic, social, public, and private entities and bring them all together like a destination organization. This is our shining moment for it. We just have to always be conscious of remembering, the doubling down on what our brand means, to be a good steward of it. Essentially what we've long described as what we call being a community of shared value. So I just want to leave it more or less with hope that we've seen tremendous change in our sector through the pandemic. It's not going to stop, but just understand this is what we're built to do. And so I'm really excited to see the positive things and where we'll come out of the other end of this as destination organizations.
Well put. Ben, I'm going to throw it to you. I'm a big fan of your expansive thinking. You've added a lot to so many panels that I've been sitting on other work in the last while. What's the call to action?
Well, when you're sitting down with a smart group of people like this, and you're the one who goes last, you have to wonder what's left for me to say. But maybe I can just integrate. Maybe that's the word that I like, is integration, because there was a while back. So I've only been in tourism industry a couple of years, and I was trying to do stakeholder mapping and analysis of a city. And I was sitting at my whiteboard, and the whiteboard just kept getting more and more full until I was like, what is the tourism stakeholder? And it turns out there's so many facets to that. And that has been redefined as well throughout the course of the pandemic, which is the tourism is the tourist is the resident, and that's now placemaking, right? So how do you make this a place that's attractive to live? How do you make connections that are going to solve that talent issue, which Andreas mentioned? And one thing that we've noticed too is like there's more integration from the top down. So the museums, the business districts, the community organizations are now vertically integrating into these destinations. And the destinations get value because they're getting the cultural authenticity. They're giving the tourist a better experience too. So they're more likely to come back and things like that. One thing that I want to emphasize as well, which is something I'm personally very excited about, is this notion of social impact through tourism, which is we've seen more and more an interest in regenerative tourism, sustainable tourism. But there was a great example that Joe gave around, this is, I think it was Louisville, if I'm not mistaken. And it was this integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion essentially into a tourism product. So you're achieving a social impact outcome, and you're developing a really great experience that has a socioeconomic benefit to that community. That's an amazing intersection of priorities. And that also presents opportunities for, if you're like a DMO, hey, you can access funding from different pools if you're able to measure impact and show you can have impact. And it's been a very exciting for us as a company, because we've had the opportunity to work on a number of social impact projects that become tourism products, especially in climate action and citizen science. There was I don't know who it was who told me, and maybe it was you, David, but it's the story of people will pay thousands of dollars to fly to the Amazon jungle to count monarch butterflies because they care about the environment, and that experience for them is mind-blowing. That like elevates their spirituality, that makes them feel connected to a higher purpose in climate change and all these things. And younger people they're not just conscious consumers. Like they've gone way beyond that. They're righteously motivated to make change, and baking that psychology into the experience is a powerful market segment that is now opening up. And the destinations that are tapped into that are going to see hordes of young people coming to become engaged in their destinations because they feel alignment of values. I think that community value piece was really a great term, because that's part of that.
Guys, this has been a great panel. I think one of the best things we can do in the world is when we demystify things that are, just within reach that we can do. And I think you've gone a long way to helping us with that. I mean, we can get started on this in so many places. We can look around the world and find places where this is happening and great examples. I do want to do a bit of a shout out. This episode came out of the thinking of a couple of people on the marketing team at Simpleview. We were kicking around our community newsletter, and Casey Pooley had written a really cool article, Joe, on your work in Louisville. Eileen Connell was totally taken with your work, Ben Switzer, and they said, can't you get all three of them on? Can't you get Joe and Ben and Andreas on? So shout out to the team. It was their idea, not mine. I wish it was mine. It's a great idea. It's great. It's great to have you guys. Thanks a lot. Let's do it again.